So I'm going to call this regular meeting of the LASD board to order. The recording and/or broadcast of this meeting is being made at the direction of the board, and the recording and/or broadcast may capture images and sounds of those attending the meeting. We'll do a quick roll call. Ms. Spicer?
Here.
Mr. K?
Present.
Mr. Ivanovich?
Present.
Mr. Talio?
Here.
I am here. All board members are present. So D2, agenda approval. If any board members would like to provide comment on the agenda, please raise your hand virtually or physically. Anybody? Seeing none, can I get a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Motion by Shali, second by Vladimir. Roll call vote. Ms. Spicer?
Yes.
Mr. K?
Yes.
Mr. Ivanovich?
Yes.
Mr. Talio?
Yes.
I vote yes. Motion passes 5-0. D3, closed session report. No action was taken in closed session. So we'll move on to D4, superintendent's update. Mr. Bear.
So Brian, I think I was looking at this. I think everything I want to share out is really contained in the 3 main items tonight. So I think it makes sense to move to there.
All right. We'll move on to E, the consent agenda. If any board members would like to provide comment on the agenda, please use your raise hand button or raise your hand. Mr. Ivanovich.
I'd like to comment on E4, Resolution 1920-28, CalPERS. Do I do it now?
Yes, indeed. Now is the time.
Okay. So I don't think in principle I have any objections to the resolution. I just think that it needs some editing, perhaps. Section 2, whereas the second line, there's an extra V in there. A question for Jeff on resolved A. This is a time span of 33 years. How many people are we talking about here?
I'm going to take it, Jeff.
Okay, Randy.
Yeah, Jeff's on mute anyways. This resolution comes from CalPERS. It's the exact wording that they sent us. And the resolution, we have to do an updated resolution every time there's a change in our collective bargaining agreement with employees. We made a change that'll take effect this coming January 1st, 2021, with the employer's contribution towards the health plan for LATA members and future LATA retirees.
All right, that didn't answer the question, but that's okay. Let's move on. Resolved B, the part that's in bold, I'm not sure that's a sentence in English. And then the second to last line of that part there, it's not clear that the administrative fees and contingency reserve fund assessments are added to the total premium or to the section 2289(2)B amounts. I don't know which one it goes to.
Vladimir, I can get you answers. I can't see the agenda right in front of me right now, but I can get you answers to those specific questions. Just
I guess my recommendation is that the resolution be clarified so that it's clear where those that the administrative fees and contingency reserve fund assessments are added. To me, it's not clear which one is which. Maybe maybe to Jessica, it's, as a lawyer, it is. Unresolved F on the next page.
Can I, sorry, Vladimir, I don't mean to cut you off, but Randy, is there time pressure on this?
No, we can bring it back at the next meeting, Brian.
Would that, it might be simpler if we brought this back at the next meeting so that Vladimir can get his questions answered.
All right, that's fine.
That's all right.
But let me ask one other question then. If you're not going to change any wording in here because it is what was given to us by CalPERS, then it's pointless for me to comment on it. If we can change the wording to make things clearer, then I'm happy to work with Randy to do that. I don't know what Randy or Jeff, I don't know which one,
Or we can get clarification on some of your questions without changing the wording as well. So we'll take the next.
Okay, I guess the thing is that if my feeling is if I don't understand it, then there are probably other people that don't understand it as well. And in that case, it needs clarification. That's all. Okay, I'll work with Randy.
Okay.
Other than
Anybody
that,
else?
I would move that we approve the consent items except for E4, Resolution 1920-28 CalPERS.
Anybody willing to second?
Yeah, I will.
All right. Motion by Vladimir, second by Steve to approve consent items E1 through E4, or sorry, E1 through E3 and E5. Ms. Spicer, roll call vote.
Yes.
Shally,
Yes.
Mr. Ivanovich,
Yes.
Steve. I vote yes. Motion passes 5-0. All right. Moving on to, do we have employee requests to address the board?
Brian, I see Roberta here, but I'm not sure she is addressing the board tonight. I do not see Ricky Hu.
All right. Let's see. Not seeing a hand from Roberta. I'm going to assume not. Unless anybody wants to put their hand up as a employee representative. I don't see anybody, so we'll move on to community comments. This time is reserved for citizens and employees to address the board on items that are not on the agenda. The board is not permitted to discuss or take action on non-agenda items except to instruct the superintendent to review the matter further, report back to the board at a subsequent meeting, or place the matter on a future agenda. The board may make a brief comment or ask clarifying questions. So we will now take public comment. If you would like to make such public comment, members of the public should use the raise hand button if using the Zoom app, or plus *9 if you are on your phone. Your name will be announced when it is your turn to speak. Prior to providing your comment, please make sure your microphone is on, and each speaker will get 3 minutes. So we'll give everybody a moment to raise hands. Seeing no raised hands, we will move on to item H1. Summer Learning for All in LASD. Mrs. McGonigal will present the plans for Summer Learning for All in LASD to be launched to families on June 1st.
All right, thank you. Hello there. So I did want to share the plans we've been putting together for families that will launch on June 1st. If you want to go to the next slide, please. So we've based each of our plans for our exiting TK through exiting 8th grade students around these 3 areas, but I'll talk about some additional areas as well. But it's really around focusing on the big skills and concepts in mathematics, in reading, and then we will be launching our 6 C's. And so we've given families who want to participate in some summer learning. I also know we have some families who might not want to participate. We are encouraging families to have their students participate in some capacity to make sure that kids are really well prepared for the upcoming school year. So we've given a guideline suggestion around somewhere between 30 and 45 minutes a day in math and reading. The 6 C's will offer limitless possibilities and opportunities for folks, but I want to remind our families that our youngest learners aren't likely going to sit down for 45 minutes of math review in one chunk of time. So to be really mindful, we don't want this to feel like traditional school, but more like a summer learning opportunity where kids are really engaged in some thinking about reading and mathematics and the 6 C's. So I'll get into some details. Next slide. Next slide, please. Thank you. So when we talk about math, I've actually been working with our partner districts, Mountain View Wisman and MVLA, the high school district. All 3 of our districts will actually be launching something very similar, if not identical, whether that's a link to our summer plans or kind of their version of our summer plans, which is excellent. We love working with our partner districts. But we really want to make sure that students around mathematics have some multiple opportunities. We want them to practice the skills and concepts that they learned this year in their grade level, because we know that math is super foundational, even all the way, if you think through like our Algebra 1 course for 7th and 8th graders is a foundational course for Algebra 2 and higher mathematics. So we do want to make sure that students are ending this school year and into summer and going into their next grade level with a solid skill set around what they should have learned this school year. But in addition, we really are encouraging families to just bring math into their life, right? Talk about math in daily life, play some games that might have to do with math, whether those are cards or rolling the dice or playing hopscotch or whatever that might look like. And then we've provided families some really amazing creative and problem-solving opportunities through the U Cubed and Joe Bowler's work at Stanford. These are, this image in the lower right are just 2 examples, but they are amazing, creative, problem-solving, artistic opportunities. And I know many of our families, when we think about math, we really think of that procedural or fluency. We want to memorize our times tables and all of that stuff, which is important. But we also want kids to see the beauty of mathematics and the artistry of mathematics. So we've provided some great links for families to be able to engage in that with their students, with their children, or independently for the kids. Next slide. And we could talk about reading. And again, we don't want reading practice to feel like a traditional summer school. We really want our families to be thinking about reading. We want kids to be reading volume over the summer to make sure that they're, you know, not just stretching out their one little book throughout the whole summer, but really thinking about how can we use the online resources that our families have access to, or their in-home libraries. But we want families talking about reading. We want, maybe there's a family book club, whether that's within your family or with your friends and families near and far in a virtual book club. And of course, we do want families to review with their kids, depending on the
Yeah, looks like we lost Sandra.
Let's give her just a moment, Brian.
All right.
yeah.
She will likely duck into another room with a better Wi-Fi access point.
Okay. We've been doing so well.
I know.
All right, is this any better?
Yes, I think so.
Okay, sorry about that. I've been having some problems almost all day long. I don't know where I left off with you. Did I cover reading?
I think you'd gotten
Right in the middle of
somewhere
it.
yeah, sort of in the middle, I think.
Okay. Maybe we'll move on to the next slide. We do want to make sure that students have that opportunity to review those critical skills from this year, and it will set them up for the beginning of the next school year. Next slide, thank you. And we're really excited about launching our 6 C's, and you can see the 6 C's highlighted there. And we really are taking this as an opportunity to engage kids in a whole lot of unusual activities and thinking. So we're starting with creativity, and for each C that we launch over the 6 weeks of the beginning of the summer season, each C will have 2 video lessons. So the creativity video lessons, the first one really talks about what is creativity and how might you see creativity across different disciplines. And then the second video is really about understanding the skills and really believing that you can build your own skill of creativity. And so throughout the week, students have opportunities in what we're calling micro challenges, quick little really engaging challenges for kids to practice some of their creative thinking. And then there are some opportunities for some deep dives, something that might take them several days to really think through. And it could be that they're producing something or developing a new idea or solving a problem in a creative way. So each week we will launch, we're starting with creativity and then going into critical thinking. And we'll make our way through the C's over time. I think this would be really fun for families to do a lot of these activities together. But of course, kids can do them on their own as well. And we have a version for our TK2 students, for our 3-5 students, and our 6-8 students. Next slide, please. And then, of course, we don't want to forget our English learners, because we know that over summer season, if they don't have an opportunity to be practicing their English skills, that we don't want any slide to be happening. So we have some really terrific resources for our English learners, especially our beginning learners. Our EL team, which is a phenomenal team out at our school sites, has made sure that all of our students who would really benefit from the Rosetta Stone program, which is a great program for students learning how to speak English, that each family has the login information that they need. This is really best for students who are a little bit more independent. So we wouldn't necessarily put a kindergarten student on Rosetta Stone. They need to be a little bit more independent at a computer. But so all of our families and students who would benefit from Rosetta Stone have that access information, and our EL team has made sure that we're ready to launch with that if they're not already using it. And they are also committed to our EL team to working with families and their direct students that they work with on a weekly basis to let them know what is available within our summer learning program and really directing kids for the particular practice that they would want, even introducing them a little bit in how to engage in some of the materials to support our English learners. There are lots of games and activities and what have you. I put just a screenshot in the lower left there around these choice board activities from the county, Tulare County, I believe. Each one of these are kind of an interactive slide deck for kids or families to link into. So even if you wanted to do something as simple as watch a TV show in English, it provides you some direct instruction in what your task is. Perhaps it will give you some instruction on what is a noun and give you some forms of nouns. And then your job is to watch your TV show or go outside and decide what are some of the nouns that you know, and kind of takes you through a process to engage in some grammar. Sometimes it's vocabulary, all sorts of different options for families to engage in there. Next slide. And so on June 1st, early, hopefully in that morning, we will be sending out the communication to families with this information. All of this is housed within a summer learning website. So again, families can access their child's grade level, but they will have access to all of the different grade levels and resources available through the website, and I'll also be sharing kind of a contact information. So should families have questions or the tech isn't working or something's broken, I've had multiple people look at it from many angles, so hopefully we won't have too many problems. But we're really excited to see that our kids engage and keep up with their good learning over summer. So I'm happy to answer questions.
Great. Do any board members have questions before we go to public comment? Anybody want to raise a hand? No? Oh, Vladimir, go ahead.
Do we have a summer principal?
So we are offering extended school year virtually for students who are,
Sandra, do
Yes.
we have a person who is the summer principal?
maybe that's me.
Okay, all right, that's all I want to know. And is there anything in here that would also work for children with special needs?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I didn't, okay.
So for our students who are in our resource program, they follow the exact same curriculum in their general education classroom, right, with their special education support. And many of our SDC, our special day class students, also are following that same curriculum if it meets their needs. So they should be able to access kind of the general learning plan. And then I believe for some students where that might not be appropriate, the special ed department has been working with teachers to make sure that there is something comparable that would better meet their needs.
Okay, great. One final question is, teachers know where students stand in terms of learning and stuff like that. Do we have a mechanism to make sure that those who really do need the summer program are actually doing things in the summer program?
Not explicitly, I would say. We've asked teachers to, as this opens the 1st, and our teachers are spending from the 1st to the 10th in just kind of those ending the year, wrapping up the school year with their students. We've encouraged teachers to highlight for kids what might be available and where those kind of suggestions might fall, knowing the teacher and the students in particular. But we do not have a mechanism. We're not taking attendance. This isn't through a Google Classroom. We don't have personnel dedicated to a summer school. This is really an independent program.
Okay, all right. Thanks. That's all.
Okay. Anyone else have questions?
I have
Go
a
ahead.
question. More of it, I just want to, it's more along the lines of where Vladimir was going. I just want to know or hear more about how we're going to be ensuring or doing our best to close the achievement gap over the summer, or just really what are we doing in that regard? I know that the kids that are achieving are going to do fine, or have the parental support to do fine. I'm just really worried about those kids that are already struggling. So what are we planning in that regard?
So it is a challenge, and we talked about, the best way to move forward this summer. We typically offer our intervention reading program with our great partnership with the YMCA, which we've had some pretty good success over the last couple of years as we've kind of figured out the best way to do it. After talking with the few folks currently who are doing reading intervention in a virtual world, it did not seem like the best way to provide intervention. So we really talked internally around, and that this was even from folks who were had existing relationships. I was your intervention teacher all year, and then we went online. And so trying to keep that connection has been a challenge. And if we thought about all new teachers coming in without that established relationship, and a very short, 20 to 40 minute course, intervention class with kids, we didn't really feel like it would result in any growth. So we talked about trying to plan for something that could be more independent this summer. And then once we are back in school and can reestablish those relationships, whether we're in physical school or virtual school, once we have those relationships up and running, how can we start our more targeted intervention program in the fall?
Yeah, this just sounds very hard because I worry about us not what if we don't go back physically in the fall? It just kind of keeps on piling on. I don't have the answer. You definitely have better answers than I do, but I'm just, I'm very worried.
It's a challenge. Yep, it is a challenge.
Okay, anyone else? Otherwise, we'll go to public comment and then come back for more discussion. We will now take public comment on this agenda item. To comment on this agenda item, members of the public should use the raise hand button if using the Zoom app, or press *9 if using your phone. Your name will be announced when it is your turn to speak. Prior to providing your comment, please be sure your microphone is on. We have at least a couple of comments, so each speaker will be given 3 minutes.
The first speaker will be Sangeeth Paruri.
Hey there, thanks for all your hard work and taking my question. I thought the presentation on the summer learning looks great. The curriculum seems something that'll be manageable and enticing. Looking forward to having that for my kids. Just a couple questions. One, if it's possible or practical, I would encourage us to make the curriculum available to the community at large. There's a lot of great resources we have here, whether it's districts nearby or other in the community. Also, are we providing any way, if we're not, we should look into providing resources for lower income families that don't have computers? I know we're helping them during the school year. I think we should look into that over the summer, both Wi-Fi access and computers like we have been doing. Another thing, I like the program. I understand that we can't mandate attendance. It's an optional on your own program, but I really think we have to do tracking to see how many students are coming onto the program and which students are coming onto the program. Otherwise, we have all this work that you've put into it. We have no way of knowing if it's been a good program or not. We have no way of knowing if we can benefit. For kids come into the school year at the beginning of the year, teachers will have no way of knowing who's been engaged throughout that process. And what I'm worried about is the summer programs may actually increase the achievement gap, because wealthier families are going to look after their kids and make sure they're on these summer programs. Lower income students may not have that same extra nudge. And so if we're not tracking it, we'll have no insight. So I really think tracking that is really critical. I understand that making it a requirement is a leap too far. It's too much to implement that quickly, but we have to have some sort of tracking. And then the last thing is, I didn't hear any sort of commentary around assessment, especially for our kids that are struggling. I think it's really important the district understands how they're ending the year and how they're going to be starting the year. So I think that's just really important, that if we can't provide these extra resources, we should at least know where these students are at, so we know how much of a problem we may be potentially facing. And so these are kind of my feedback and some of the areas that the program can be improved. But the overall curriculum, what you're trying to bite off, the focus areas, all of that seems great. So thanks for all the work.
All right, thank you, Sangeeth. Jeff or Sandra, I don't know if you wanted to respond to the questions there about Wi-Fi and device resources to lower income families, or tracking of the uptake on the summer program now, or if you wanted to bring that back.
So Go ahead, Sandra.
We are not collecting the devices or the hotspots that we have loaned out to families just so they can participate in the summer learning over summer. So unless a student has told us that they're, leaving the district and moving, we are not collecting any of that.
And then are we going to do usage tracking of these things, or is that difficult?
I think it would be very difficult, the format that we've kind of developed it in. I don't know how we would track participation other than a self-reporting tool.
Okay. I think we're ready for the next comment.
The next speaker will be Brooke Lopez.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Sandra. I just have a couple of questions for you, kind of unrelated to the curriculum that you presented. One is, will parents be given guidance on the key skills that you mentioned in math and other areas for their children with regard to reviewing the math and the reading so that we know exactly what we're looking for? And then two, will the district be recommending any programs for skills like typing and spelling, typing significantly because of this online learning platform, things like that that we can implement at home to help our kids be more successful online?
Hi, Brooke. I think it's interesting. I hadn't thought of kind of the typing component. I can look to see if there's something that we can add. But yes, the details around what are the skills are incredibly explicit for families. So you have everything from anchor charts to practice prompts to either have your child independently, or if they're not quite old enough, to help support your child in some of that review and learning.
Great. All right, next speaker.
Our next speaker is Amy Wang.
Hi, everyone, and thanks, Sandra, for that presentation. It sounds like an exciting program for the summer. I have one comment specifically around the 6 C's. I think it's been mentioned a few times, even in the town hall last week. But I'm not sure all parents know what the 6 C's are and that it relates to the philosophy of portrait of a learner. So just a suggestion to perhaps highlight that and kind of show that picture that you've shown at other places, like with the LAEF board and such.
Yep.
And then I wanted to follow up on Sangeet's suggestion about tracking. So if there's a way to do a self-reporting tool to track, and even if it's just parents responding at the end of summer, I think it would be a good data to capture. I know you've developed the platform in a way that it's more asynchronous and perhaps there's no way of tracking in the back end, but if you just do a quick survey or something like that, I think that would be very valuable for the district to see the effectiveness and to the extent whether this helps with the achievement gap or widens the achievement gap. I just think it would be good information to have.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you. I don't see any further comments. So we will close public comment and return to board discussion. Are there any board members who have further comments or questions? Jessica, Shali, Steve? No? Vladimir?
Yeah, I guess I think we need some way of contacting parents, because my fear is what's going to happen. I think Sangeet mentioned this. My fear is that there's going to be a group of students who will sort of engage, and they'll do fine. And then there's a group of students that won't engage. And those are the ones actually who really should engage. And I understand that it's a tough problem. But maybe, at the end of 2 weeks or something like that, somebody could try to contact all those parents whose students are known to be struggling and ask them, have you done anything? Are you aware of this? And then do it again another 4 weeks and again in 6 weeks. It turns out that the research on virtual learning is abysmal. No, the research isn't abysmal. It's the results of virtual learning are totally abysmal. And very, very few schools that seem to do well at all in it. So I would not, I hope people don't have high expectations that children are going to come back in the fall, brimming with new information, and it's not going to happen. But we do need to try to make the best we can of whatever situation it is. So I just urge some sort of mechanism to contact the parents and make sure that they're on board. That's all. By the way, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention, and last time and also this time, I think that what you've done so far, I took a look at the website. I think it's really, really good. So what's there is really good. I just think we should have low expectations for the success.
Anyone else? No, go ahead, Charlie.
Oh, first I want to thank Sandra for that. Makes me feel very good about heading into the summer in this very crazy, unprecedented time. A little bit to sort of address what Vladimir was just saying. What I'm more concerned about is summer learning loss. Like, I'm concerned about that every year. And I feel like what we're instituting this summer will probably go a long way towards either equalizing that or just mitigating that. And I think that if we find that it's successful, I mean, I know it's a lot of bandwidth, but it might be something to think about in future years. So that's it.
Jessica or Steve? I guess I would say I agree that if we can do a survey of parents, I think that would be helpful. I think a little bit of data, even if self-reported, is better than none. I would actually wonder, given that we know that there are a lot of issues with virtual learning, and that, as you were saying, sort of, even virtual one-on-one help is not necessarily effective. I mean, is there any scope, if it turns out that we get to July and shelter in place is relaxing a little bit, is there any scope for being able to try to do some in-person supplementing, sort of once a week, just reaching out to some of our most at-risk students, the kinds who would be who have been working, one-on-one with volunteers, especially in the lower grades, or, I mean, it seems to me that there's, certain populations who are sort of most urgent, right? Like, as we've been talking about in previous meetings, based on our assessment results, right? The ones who are particularly far behind, especially in the upper grades, for whom it's really going to be painful. I guess the question was asked, and I don't expect necessarily an answer right now, but something to think about is, if we could have somebody sit down with them in a one-on-one later in the summer, is there scope for trying to do that? What would that take? I mean, I think trying to figure out what we're actually going to do once school resumes in the fall is the top priority, but in my mind, this would be sort of just under that, in terms of how do we get those students back on board if we can. Okay. Any other?
I think that Brian, I think that's something we can look at and bring information back to the board.
Yeah. So I think it would be good to see, based on the feedback that you've gotten here, just an update next week or the week after as we go into summer, in terms of, I saw questions about, I mean, you answered, I think, a lot of the questions, but, online guidance, because I have seen some concern from parents about, you know, we used to the message used to be try to keep your kids off devices as much as possible. And now it's, you know, on devices all the time. So I think more content or refreshed content for just parents, how to think about this summer, you know, if they can't find a camp or all the camp, you know, they can't find a summer camp, what should they be trying to do? What's realistic? What should they be telling their kids who are on devices more earlier than they thought they were going to be? That kind of thing would be helpful too.
Yep.
All right, then I think we will move on. Whoops, sorry, we will move on to H2, math placement plan for 2020-2021. Mrs. McGonigal will discuss the plans for math placement in grades 6 through 8 for the 2020-2021 school year due to COVID-19.
Yes, thank you. So next slide we can start with. I really wanted to share with you some detail around the challenge we've been facing around math placement and what we've kind of come upon as our solution. So as you remember, the California Math Placement Act of 2015, among many things, one of the pieces it really put in place for us was this idea that we had to use multiple academic objective measures to be used for placement. And so we shifted our practices after that came down and have been pretty much following the same guidelines that we enacted after that. But the predicament we have found ourselves in, and believe me, we are not the only school district, is that all of our academic objective measures either have no data or incomplete data. So for our incoming 6th graders and some of our incoming 7th graders, of course, we did not use the CASP test, was kind of put on hold for this year. Our most recent iReady data, which is our math diagnostic that is adaptive for students, the most recent data we have is from early September, which is really not necessarily valid data after a whole year of learning mathematics. And then our third measure that we've used over the past few years is the MARS, the problem solving tasks that are put out every March. And unfortunately, the timing just happened to coincide with us getting closer to our March 13th last day of school. So while we do have some data from 5th and 6th graders, it's incredibly incomplete data, and which poses a challenge for us to be able to accurately place students for that incoming school year. Next slide, please. So of course, we've been working with a variety of folks over the last few weeks as we've been trying to problem solve our partner districts again, because they too are facing a slightly similar, a little bit different dilemma in their placement. And of course, working with the high school to make sure that they just know kind of what our practices are going to be for the coming year. We've been working with our junior high principals to really understand the impacts of math and the master schedule, and how feasible would it be to change, you know, courses mid-year at the junior high schools, and kind of what considerations and parameters we had to work under. And then of course, we've been working closely with our 6-8 math teachers to understand their concerns and do some problem solving together to come up with a solution. So next slide, we'll start by talking about our incoming 6th graders. So these are our current 5th graders. And what we're planning on doing with our incoming 6th graders next year is to have all students enrolled in a 6th grade math course. And for the first 6 weeks or so of the school year, we really want teachers to get to know students. Again, we don't know if we're going to be in person, if we're going to be every other day in person, if we're going to be fully remote, or some combination of that in between. But we want to make sure that students have an opportunity to get to know their new teacher, that they're engaged in some good mathematics. And over those 6 weeks, we do want to assess students. So we typically use the iReady, and we can come up with a new MARS series of tasks for students. So we get some recent and accurate data in that kind of end of September, very early October timeframe. We might need to replace iReady depending on whether or not we are doing distance learning. I know our partner districts are also talking about what does it mean to proctor an exam in a distance situation? Would we be able to bring students in small groups? Might there be another assessment, knowing that many of our students take hours, plural, to get through iReady? Might there be a better assessment that we want to use to help with guiding our placement decisions? So in those first 6 weeks, kids will be engaged in Great Math. They'll do a couple of assessments. And then by mid-October or so, once we've had a chance to score and understand what the data is telling us, this is when students will either remain in that 6th grade math course, or they will go into the traditional CC 6-7 course that covers more of the 7th grade standards than the 6th grade standards. And just that typically about the first 3 weeks of the school year is when students are fairly aligned in what they're doing. This does broaden that to about 6 weeks. So we do have to slightly redesign what that 6th grade math course and then what the corresponding sections of CC 6-7 or the 6th grade math course will look like. And so we're doing that centrally with our group of 6th grade teachers. So it's consistent across all of the schools that during those 6 weeks, every school and every 6th grader will be focused on the same content area. And then as the courses veer off, that will shift slightly, but again, it will be centrally aligned, which is great. So 6th grade is an easier solution for us because we do have a little bit more flexibility with our 6th graders being at the elementary school and not having to deal with master scheduling 7 courses for 500 students. So next slide, let's talk a little bit about our 7th graders. So we have 2 buckets of students. I'll talk, the group on the right there is actually a little bit easier. Our current 6th graders who are enrolled in that CC 6-7 math course, they will automatically, as they do, go into the next logical sequence for them. That's Algebra 1. So they will enter 7th grade going into Algebra 1. We typically, at the beginning of 7th grade, students in the CC6 class are split into 2 courses, a CC7 course and a CC7-8 course. CC is Common Core. But because of the constraints, and again, not having the data that we typically have and the constraints of what a junior high master schedule is, we can't really place students and then replace them 6 weeks later like we're doing with 6th grade. So as we've been chatting with teachers and principals and our partner districts, we've really settled on the idea that all of our 7th graders are going to go into a new course. So I don't want to compare it to a CC 7-8 course. I don't want to compare it to a CC 7 course. It's truly a new course that's being designed by our math teachers at the junior high, called, as they named it, 7th grade math. And this course, I think I want to go to the next slide, which will probably provide me a little bit more detail. Thank you. So this course is being currently redesigned. You know, we haven't redesigned our junior high math courses for a little while, and the teachers are really, now that they've been working in the Common Core standards for 5+ years, they really have a sense of like the trajectory of where the math is going, what do they need most when they hit algebra or the Common Core 8 course. So this redesigned course for all 7th graders who are not in Algebra 1 will ultimately, it can prepare students to go into algebra, but I want to be really clear here. We're not saying that all the students enrolled in this course will go into algebra, but it will provide them the pathway if that's the appropriate next placement. We might have some students who don't master some of those required standards. It's actually 3 kind of sets of standards. So if they don't master those standards to get into the algebra track course pathway, they will go into 8th grade math or Common Core 8 math as an 8th grade student. So we are developing this course with our junior high teachers and designing it so we can provide differentiation within the same physical classroom or virtual classroom. So again, students will, if they master the standards, move into algebra as an 8th grader. And if they don't master those critical algebra, pre-algebra standards, they will go into the Common Core 8 or 8th grade math course and not take algebra until 9th grade. I think I created a visual in the next slide. So just to kind of give you the big sense of what's happening for everyone here. So our 6th graders will go in all together in this giant bubble of what we're calling 6th grade math and spend the first weeks of school together. We'll do some assessment, whether that's virtual or in person, and have some data to be able to place students into either 6th grade CC 6-7, or they will remain in that 6th grade math course. And then it typically goes across to the right, pretty straight. So students in the 6th grade math or students who go into the 7th grade math will then go into either 8th grade math or Algebra 1 in 8th grade. And the students who are in that more advanced pathway will continue on as they always have, getting to geometry honors in 8th grade. And then you can kind of see where those lead to at the high school. What else do I want to say? Our current students who are 7th grade students going into 8th grade, they will go into one of these 3 courses. So they're already, if they're in Algebra 1, they're on the trajectory to go into geometry honors in 8th grade. If they're in the CC 7-8 course, they typically go into the Algebra 1 course. If they're in CC 7, they typically go into the 8th grade math or CC 8 course. And I don't believe we typically have a whole lot of movement among courses when they hit 8th grade. Do I have one more slide? Questions? I'm happy to answer questions.
All right, thank you, Sandra. So first we'll do clarifying questions from board members. Anybody want to raise your hand? I think the only question I have is if there are parents who, having seen how their kids are dealing with virtual learning, like if they have 7th graders, for example, or either 6th or 7th graders who are on one of the higher tracks and they're concerned about continuing on that given what has happened in the spring, how should they reach out to their principal, or how should they approach that?
You know, we just had a partner meeting today with all 3 school districts really talking about math, and we're really encouraging at every level. This includes our 8th graders who are going into 9th grade at the high school, but every level along the way. We are, I don't want to say we are expecting, but we are anticipating that there will be some different needs at the start of the year because of the remote learning situation, and every course along the way is preparing to be equipped to address those different needs than we've ever really had before. That includes the high school, that includes our 8th grade teachers, our 7th grade teachers, our 6th grade teachers, and really all the way down. So I wouldn't necessarily encourage somebody to shift off of their math pathway right from the get-go before even starting a course. But of course, you know, if families feel really solid, or perhaps the whole year was a struggle and now they're extra worried, I would say that they should reach out to the principal of their school to have that conversation first.
Great. Any other questions? Otherwise, we will go to public comments. We will now take public comment on this agenda item. To comment on this agenda item, members of the public should use the raise hand button if using the Zoom app, or press *9 if using your phone. Your name will be announced when it is your turn to speak, and please make sure your microphone is on when you are called. Each speaker will be given 3 minutes.
Our first speaker is Sangeeth Paruri.
Hey there. The presentation on the math approach all seems to make sense to me. I didn't have any specific questions there, just a couple potential suggestions. The district and Sandra, you guys do a great job at this, but I would continue on the math in particular for next year. I would keep the communication doses to parents very high. I think you're going to need to explain things over and over and over again. And even after you do that, parents are going to be complaining that you never explained it to them. So I would just plan for that in advance. And I'm assuming this is going to be, or I'm guessing this is going to be an area of consternation and some strife next year. So I would plan for that in advance. Another thing that I would recommend, given what's happening with COVID here, and that we don't necessarily have the same standardized tests and things that you've had for math placement that we typically have, we could get placement that could appear discriminatory, you know, even though that's not your intention. So I would encourage the district to have lawyers review the policy. I don't know if you've done that, and I don't know if we've done that in the past, but I think having a legal review of our math placement policy in this environment, I think that would be prudent to see if there's any context that we may have missed. That's the only comment that I had.
Thanks, Sangeet.
All right, thank you. Anybody else? Seeing no other public comments, we will reopen for board discussion. Anybody have further comments? Feel free to unmute yourselves.
Sandra, this sounds a lot easier than previous years, so you're getting off very easy, I think.
Really, Vladimir?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, you don't have hordes of parents down your neck yet.
Yet. I appreciate our community's love for mathematics instruction. I do.
Okay, I don't see a lot of other comment. I think for my part, this seems to make sense given where we are and the lack of assessments. So, and I think you've said already, you know, otherwise the process is unchanged in terms of there will be assessments to make sure the kids are in the right place and they'll be able to move as much as possible. I understand the junior high is harder given all the scheduling constraints, but my impression is that the junior high staff as well is, you know, very willing to do what they can. So even if it requires further schedule shifting, I'm sure that the parents will be able to get help. And I encourage, as always, parents to reach out if they have issues.
Absolutely.
I think we're always willing to try to help. Okay. Anybody else? Not seeing anybody else, so I think we will move on to H3. Reopening for the 2020-2021 school year. There is a great deal to be done in order for our schools to resume next fall. Mr. Baer will provide an overview of factors being considered in the planning underway for the 2020-21 school year.
All right, good evening again. Yeah, as Brian said, really want to, Marcy, that's way too far. Do you have that as the second slide, Marcy? Sorry. Go to the next slide.
Yes, I do.
Okay. All right, going back to the first slide, please. Thanks. So,
hey, Jeff, do you want me to share I've got a version that's, I don't know if I can, but I've got a version that has the slides I think you're missing.
Yeah, I'll be okay. Let's see where it goes here.
All right.
Just wanted to take this opportunity to share with the board and the public just what has been happening thus far. We are certainly in a position right now, since schools were forced to go remotely back in mid-March, really working to respond to the varying situation that changes frequently. And so we're tasked with responding to that and maintaining the level of excellence really that our community expects and our teachers expect. So go ahead, Marcy, next slide. So starting here with instruction, wanted to just talk to the board about where the path is going. And I have to shift something here, sorry. All right. Where we've been and where we're headed. Sandra talked about some of this with regard to summer school, and it lands just about in the middle. But we launched back in March, as you know. We iterated and revised right around spring break to make some improvements to the current model. And now we are in full swing looking ahead to the next year and everything that is involved with that. I think one thing to remember in this, and we've talked about this previously, but we were placed into this situation very quickly. I was just talking to our staff about this a few hours ago. We were thrust into this very quickly, and our teachers responded incredibly well to the situation. But I reminded them that this is still an emergency situation, and they are doing well. Our families are responding quite well as also, thankfully. But this is still an emergency situation that we consider ourselves in. And Sandra's team is underway right now with a look at, now that we have some time to look ahead and plan for the fall, what might that look like if we were not in an emergency situation? So we'll talk just a little bit more about that. Next slide. Yeah, so Brian, can you go ahead and share? There you go. We'll just do it this way. Okay, go to the next. Thank you. Sorry about this. Wait, go back to that previous slide, Brian. Right there. So we are underway, looking ahead, and this is involving just about everyone at in central locations at our district. We have pulled together teams representing teaching. That's Sandra and the teachers involved there, administrators. We have our health services team involved. Randy is involved in the financial aspect, and his operations and maintenance staff as well. Also embedded in here really is the team that Aaron Green leads that has to do with personnel and health services. And as we look ahead and do our planning, we recognize that we're in a complicated situation. It starts with not knowing all of the answers and what exactly is going to be in place when the middle of August comes, but being tasked with doing our best to plan for that eventuality. So we think about the fact that our default position is we would love to have kids on site in school with teachers in front of them each day. That's our best case scenario, recognizing that we probably won't land there at the outset, not in full capacity, without some restrictions. But with that in mind, we recognize that any plan we come up with has to balance a number of aspects, right? Chief among them is safety and health of students, of staff, of families, making sure that all remain healthy during this crisis. Also, we're balancing student academic learning with their social emotional well-being. We know that this situation has placed tremendous stress on families, on students, on parents, on staff. It is something that we pay close attention to and are planning for supporting as we move ahead. I mentioned a moment ago that the future is uncertain exactly where this is going to land. And so that's one of the other things that is really core to the planning that we're doing, is supporting our teachers and all staff members so that they are able to respond to, adapt, and really react to whatever circumstance gets put in front of them. It's going to be critical. And then Randy will talk a bit more about this a little bit later, and that's our financial stability in the future. Whatever we develop, we recognize we want to be able to maintain going ahead without having to remove or cut too much. So we want to be thoughtful and I guess financially prudent with how we make those plans. This whole document will grow over time. You will see this again and again. I know we have 2 more meetings in June. I would ask that the board stay flexible this summer. I would think we're going to need additional meetings in the month of June, July, and August as we move forward and get closer to an ultimate decision and resolution to all aspects of what we're calling reopening school for the 2021 school year. So next slide. So this slide really is put forth to represent the myriad of considerations that we are addressing right now. And we have been addressing them for the current school year. We're addressing them for the June 1 to 10 timeframe, which is that time where we are going to have staff back on campus and we are going to have parents returning to campus to pick up materials and drop off materials. And we need to make sure we're doing this in a way that is safe for all. So there's been a great deal of time put into the planning for that, those days. So this is really broken into 2 big categories. Certainly we can break them into micro categories, but on the left side really focuses on the instructional component of our program and the students. That's their health and wellness. That's both physical and social emotional. Equity, we've been talking a bit about that as it relates to summer school earlier, but we are keenly aware of needing to support equity with whatever plan we move forward. Curriculum and instruction are a big part of this. Sandra will be talking more to you in the coming weeks about instructional planning. There are large teams working on vetting instructional plans. Human capital, really looking at working conditions, PD for our staff, professional development for our staff, and workforce going forward. And then the enrollment, student enrollment. That is fluctuating a bit right now as we do deeper dives into checking on whether families are returning, gathering that information. The pandemic certainly has caused some changes in decisions about people living in the area. We're also getting return of students from private school as well. So that's all in the categories of students and instruction. Developing a game plan for each one of those areas is what we're in the midst of right now. And then the finance and operations side, that's us right here, understanding how we will be functioning and how our functioning will evolve should the restrictions remain in place. Facilities are a big part of our future. Understanding in the past months, we've been talking about facilities in a way that's pretty unique to Los Altos School District, right? How they relate to the charter school and so forth. Now we're really looking at understanding how our facilities can be put to use should restrictions be placed upon them by the state and or public health department. Of course, that can't be taken in a vacuum away from curriculum and instruction or health and wellness. So these, as you know, are certainly interrelated. Operations, Randy's team is looking at things like cleaning, sanitizing, frequency, the setup of facilities and how to maintain them during this. Communications are always important. We're looking to over communicate wherever we can, especially as the landscape changes constantly. Technology we touched on a bit, making sure that all our students, all our families have access and how can we support when they don't. We also realize that during this current situation in emergency remote teaching, with regard to technology, sometimes good enough was good enough. But if we're moving ahead into what we expect to be a more robust plan for teaching and learning, that may affect the technology need as well. Finances, I said Randy's going to talk a bit more about this in just a bit, and wanting to pay attention to the viability of LASD well into the future. And then lastly, this idea of a resurgence plan. We really believe that in terms of the idea of flexibility, we are probably going to have to move in and out of approaches during the first semester of this coming school year. That's either as regional situations change with regard to outbreaks, or perhaps loosening of expectations, right? But also if we have micro outbursts, right, at a school site or in a particular area of our school district, we're going to need to be ready to respond to that. And that could mean changing the instructional approach overnight. So those are the types of things that we are working on. These are all in different places in terms of progress. We are in this situation where the Department of Public Health may not be able to make recommendations until much deeper into the summer as to what August 19th is going to look like. We believe that as a school district, we are going to need to make a decision, at least a preliminary decision, much earlier than that, and be ready to flex, right? And if the information from public health comes out and allows us to do something different, then we'll be ready to flex and do that. But what we do believe is that the longer we wait to make that decision, the more it is going to feel like emergency teaching, because our teachers are not going to have the opportunity to prepare well enough for what's coming, and nor will our families. So flexibility is going to be key. Moving on, next slide. I talked about this, so let's go to the next one. So we are in the midst of a couple of things, well, many things, but a couple of things I'll point out right here. As I said, Sandra and a robust team is working on vetting a variety of approaches to learning in the fall. And we are also reaching out to families, to students, to teachers, to gather their feedback on two things, both looking back, what worked, what didn't, what could have been better, what worked well, and then also looking ahead with an understanding of what might we want to be thinking about as we look forward. We're asking parents about their thoughts on would they return to school, should we be ready to go with social distancing in the fall, or would they feel much better about keeping their child at home and teaching from home as we have been doing. So we want to understand what the sensitivity to our community is in a number of areas. So we're gathering that data. We anticipate bringing that first look back to you on June 1st. That's our next meeting. The poll does close on Friday. We're sending out another reminder tomorrow. We have about 1,200 responses from families, about 250 from students, and Sandra, 125, 150 from teachers, somewhere in there. So we've had great response. We'll send out another reminder. I will warn you that we'll put an agenda item on the agenda for Monday, June 1st. When we first post the agenda, it won't have the backup document to it because we will need to process and develop a presentation for that. and that does not close until Friday. It's not the 22nd, the 29th. It went out on the 22nd. We're leaving it open for a week. It closes on the 29th. So we'll be prepping that. All right, next slide. This is really just meant to emphasize the importance of the professional development our teachers will be going through between June 1st and June 10th. We are moving, as I said, from this idea of emergency remote teaching to a more robust blended or online learning or a hybrid of some sort, not knowing exactly what it is yet. But we want to be sure our teaching force is prepared to handle whatever's thrown at them. So Sandra and her team have developed a really flexible set of modules that get at the core trainings that teachers will want to have in their arsenal, whichever situation they're put into, and really designed to not only give them the skills, but also the confidence to be able to handle whatever comes down the road in terms of approach. Next slide. So again, looking at that process, we're exploring multiple scenarios right now. As I've said, we will begin looking at the financial implications associated with those scenarios as well. And as they get tighter, we'll push it back out for stakeholder engagement. It'll certainly come here to the board for feedback, but we still have a little ways to go. I will say that we would like to make that decision that I was talking about, putting a stake in the ground, whether we have all the information from the Department of Public Health or not. I think putting that stake in the ground by the end of June will be critical to our success 6 or 8 weeks later. All right, and then last slide. This one's really just about this idea that we know flexibility on the part of our staff, of our teachers, of our families, our community are really going to be critical. We'll have what we're calling the best in class options for each set of circumstances. We are working, as I said, to prepare for any scenario, but we need to have an understanding about realisticness and feasibility of each of those. We've talked to our district staff about the idea that we know that our preferred option is 4,000 kids back in class in front of teachers every day. That's our preferred option. So we realize anything we choose that isn't that is going to be inferior to a certain degree, right? And so we are trying to find the best that is not our preferred option. So that's about it. Happy to take questions. And Sandra, do you want to add anything, or Randy, about that? This really involves, what I presented really does involve every aspect of our district. And there are, I can tell you, hundreds and hundreds of hours being spent on this, knowing that most of our plans aren't going to be the ones that go forward, but it's important that we vet them and find that kind of best in class that I talked about.
All right, thank you, Jeff. Are there any preliminary clarifying questions from board members before we go to public comment? I don't see any. I had one, which was, Jeff, can you clarify, you were talking about end of June for putting a stake in the ground, and it wasn't clear to me whether that's sort of where that is along the process. So I was going to ask it a slightly different way, which is, do you have a date in mind when parents will know for sure what the plan is for the fall, at least as far as, you know, if we end up going 2 days on, 2 days off, that kind of thing? Basically, for parents who are going to need to line up childcare, is there a drop dead date when we can guarantee that they'll know what that's going to look like?
That is what, am I on? Yeah.
Yeah.
That is what we anticipate making a decision on by the end of June.
Okay, great.
So I look at the I think the 29th and 30th are on a Monday and Tuesday. I think, you know,
We should
planning,
keep those available.
keep those dates available, please, for a board meeting.
Okay. All right, I'm going to go ahead and unshare my screen. If I can hit the right button. All right. So we will now take public comment on this agenda item. To comment on this agenda item, members of the public should use the raise hand button if using the Zoom app, or press *9 on your phone. Your name will be announced when it is your turn to speak, and please make sure your microphone is on. We have at least 2 speakers, so each speaker will be given 3 minutes.
Our first speaker is Sangeeth Paruri.
I saw Sangeeth, but then he dropped. So let's go to the next speaker and see if Sangeeth wants to raise his hand again. Oh, no, there he is. Never mind.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. I just wanted to thank the district and staff for the great education. You know, you've been providing my kids over this period. It's been a tough period. Obviously, it's less than ideal not being with the teachers, but I've been really grateful. I've also been checking around with local school districts. I'm not sure if you're aware what you've implemented for, or you're planning to implement for summer school. That's what a handful of neighboring districts have implemented during the school year for the last 3 months. Their kids are completely on their own. There is no tracking, no checking. A lot of neighboring districts in our county, in San Mateo, Santa Clara County, teachers are not grading any homework. The quality that we're getting here is drastically better than a lot of neighboring districts. So I am grateful. I want you to know that. And then if you look around the state, it's quite scary. Quite a few districts are tracking at 20 to 50% attendance for their children. So this is going to be very painful for the county, the state as a whole. I know things are not as ideal. So if there's any parents listening to this, you know, we should all be grateful. And I've been also checking with private schools as well. There's been a lot of private schools where initially parents were thinking, oh, this is the best thing ever. I don't have to worry about my kids because they're just on Zoom all day. What we're finding is when you talk to these kids, they're getting proficient at pretending they're on Zoom. They're not engaging, they're numbing out, and they're not gathering anything. So it's great for parents because they don't have to babysit their kids, but it's not really great for children. I originally thought that was the best approach, but now I'm realizing that a balanced approach that has some online instruction, some independent instruction is really the best thing for kids. And I just have to hand it to you that you guys have landed on that model, and I'm really grateful. So just wanted to say thank you.
Brian, can I quick comment?
Yeah, of course.
I just want to say thank you for that comment, but also recognize that what was just described is really because the superiority of our teaching staff. Our teaching staff is really incredible, and their understanding of our community and the expectations within our community and their commitment to our children and our community is has really shown through during this. So I just wanted to acknowledge that.
I think that is seconded all around. Next speaker.
Our next speaker is Jeannie Tsai.
Let's see. Oh, there you go. Go ahead, Jeannie.
Sorry about that. I was muted for some reason. I just want to say thank you very much for providing the curriculum. And I have a question, or rather a comment regarding the survey form. I was wondering, since the survey has not been closed, if you would consider adding a input box for parents to fill out what hasn't gone well, because there was a box for getting feedback for what went well, but I don't know if there was none for, suggestions on how to improve going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeff or Sandra, is that a possibility? Do you want to respond to that?
I saw as a parent, I saw a input box for it. It may not have been a question specifically like that, but what are things we could improve? It was a question. I just took it today. Sorry.
Brian, I'll have a look.
Okay. Certainly, parents should feel free to email trustees or their principal or anyone sort of up the chain there if they have specific feedback or suggestions, I think. Okay, further board, so no more public comment, so we'll go back to board discussion if there's any further comments or questions or discussion from the board. Anybody want to unmute and jump in?
Brian, can I just respond? I just found it, so if I could just let the board know. There are two questions. Question 14 in the parent survey: what changes to virtual school do you think would benefit your child? And then number 15 also, if the school buildings are closed for fall 2021 and our virtual school model continues, what modifications would you want to see? So those are the two questions that I think get at what Jeannie.
Okay, Vladimir?
Just as a point of information, San Jose State is going all online for the fall. They've already made that decision. There was a mention of childcare, and there was a comment that was made in a school boards association, Santa Clara School Boards meeting association, that I think both you and Jessica were at. And it had to do with the fact that our childcare providers, on-campus providers, operate with really thin margins. And if their attendance drops, then they might not be able to reopen at all. And so that's a concern for me. Parents are going to have to do something. It's going to be a real problem for parents, and it's going to be a real problem for us as well. The other thing is, do we have any support for families who might have lost a relative or a friend to coronavirus?
So in our to answer that, and just to comment on your question prior to that, we do have resources in our community. CHAC is absolutely the direction I would point anyone who came with that tragic situation for counseling or grief services. So we do have that. And then with regard to the other childcare, we know two things. We know that is a significant childcare is a significant issue and pressure point in our parent community. It's why schools, if we are given the latitude, schools would be and will be open. But it's just waiting and understanding what what conditions we are handed and what we can accomplish within those guardrails. We know that our teachers are also essential workers, and they too have these same issues. So as an employer, I wanted the board to know also that we are partnering with Manzanita Works, who is an organization in our community that has been working on teacher housing and traffic implications. During this COVID-19 situation, they have pivoted, and they are really looking at essential worker childcare. So we are entering a partnership with them to allow our teachers to have access to childcare as essential workers. So I wanted to make sure the board was aware of that.
That's great. One piece of good news is yesterday, there were only 24 new cases of COVID-19 in Santa Clara, and we have a population that's pretty damn close to 2 million. So this is really, it's begun, if the trend continues, and I certainly hope it does, if the trend continues, is that we are getting a good handle on the COVID-19 thing. I'd like to just end by thanking you, Sandra, Randy, the entire staff at the district office, and of course all the teachers for really, really great work that you're doing, that you will be doing. I have experience with Mountain View High with one of my children, and I will say that the Los Altos version is better than what Mountain View High has managed to roll out. So kudos to everybody, and it's really, really appreciated.
Anyone else? Or I guess I will second what Vladimir just said. I'm hearing a lot of stories from around the county and the state. We are very fortunate in the partnership that we've had with our teachers and staff and families and everybody in getting through this situation and then starting to plan for the next. I don't know. I've got a couple, I don't know if they're questions or comments, but just as I'm thinking about this, things that seem possibilities. I've seen some districts talk about shifting, or in some countries actually shifting education sort of outside as much as possible to try to get around some of the, and not just get around some of the requirements, but also because to the extent that any of the science is becoming clear, it seems clear that you know, inside with lots of people is the worst case scenario, and outside in sunshine is the best case scenario. So it's just something I'm sure that you guys are thinking about and taking into account. Thinking about childcare, I actually wonder, given that a lot of the events for which we use our multis, which have a lot of kids in the same place, are likely to be, or quite possibly going to be prohibited. I wonder if there's been any thought about allowing childcare providers access to those spaces during the school day on the elementary schools, where we wouldn't normally allow them, if that would then allow, if we couldn't use those spaces anyway, basically, and then they could maybe serve more kids with more space. It's just something to throw into the mix. Steve's got a comment on that. Yeah. Or something else.
The thoughts that I think we need to be very flexible on going into the fall is we keep talking about providing care for essential worker children, but that definition of what that will be evolving as well. Standing on street corners with passing out lunches, one of the things you see is families are starting to go back to work, or being asked to go back to work, are not in what I would call essential worker categories, which means those children are going to need us to provide them care during the day, expected school day, moving forward. And so some flexibility around that is something we need to keep in mind as well as this evolves. So just that as we're doing these scenario plannings that Sounder is leading, that concept of providing, moving beyond just providing essential workers coverage, childcare coverage during the school day, is something we're going to probably be factoring into this as well. And that will put a strain on the facility. So just want to bring that up as a thought that we need to be aware of.
Yeah, I think those are all good points. I think we do need to be extra clear with our childcare providers about sort of who they're, I don't know, actually even know what the rules are right now. I know in the past, some of the on-campus childcare providers have provided care for kids at other schools in the area. I don't know whether that's part of our contract, but something to think about as we go forward, because there will be, I'm sure, lots of strange situations and other demand. And also, I think you mentioned this, Jeff, but I think it's worth sort of pointing out again that one of the reasons that we won't be back as usual is because we're likely to have a significant portion of our families and also potentially of our staff who, for medical reasons or other reasons, either themselves or family members, won't be back in the fall or basically until there's a vaccine. So we're going to need to take that into account in the design of this whole thing, that there's essentially zero possibility that it'll look exactly like it did before. And everybody needs to sort of understand that there will have to be at least some shifts. But that there will be some, I expect that there will be shifts, for parents who are in situations where they just feel like they can't send their kids back on campus, that there will be measures to accommodate that, basically, beyond what we've offered in the past for kids who just have to be absent for a period of time. Correct me if I got any of that.
No, I think that's accurate. We're recognizing that, and it absolutely was a question in the survey, to understand what percentage of families that might be, but there will be families who choose not to for a variety of reasons send their children back to physical school, even if it opens similar to what it had been. So we are preparing for that.
Great.
Go ahead, Jeff.
I just wanted to ask questions about, you kind of covered it a little bit in your presentation, I think actually more in the town hall, but we had questions more about volunteers, parent volunteers, as it relates to going back to school and whether they'll be allowed on campus. I'm most specifically thinking about hot lunch. I know we're planning on hot lunch through our vendors, but who will be giving them? There's many other things that volunteers do, but I wanted to know more about that.
We'll be sure to bring that back. We don't have that level of detail yet.
Jeff, one final comment. I think one of the scenarios that you should consider is the scenario which come June 31st or 30th, whatever the number of date is, you still don't have the information that you really need to be able to decide what kind of school we're going to have in the fall. To me, that seems the most likely scenario.
Right. So I fully believe that is what the situation will be on June 29th to 30th. And I think what I'm putting out to the board right now is that by that date, I think we are going to have to be able to say, based on the information we have right now and the best estimate we can make, we are going to go forward with this scenario for next year. And we will begin planning full force for that, recognizing that we may hear from the Santa Clara County Public Health Department on July 31st that we can do something more. I'll just call it more, right? Something more. And we will be ready to flex into that, right? So that's kind of the thinking we believe is going to be best to go forward with, is deciding end of June, this is what we're doing based on everything we know right now. This is our go forward plan. And then we will flex one direction or the other if we get more detailed information or a more permissive situation exists. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
I would, for especially those parents who are watching, I mean, this is totally unprecedented, and county public health officers in California in 100 years haven't sort of had to give the kind of orders that they're giving. So we and all the school districts are subject to the county health department directives, basically, and those are the kinds of things. And they've been extremely reluctant to try to forecast the future and give guidance more than a few weeks in advance. But I would encourage everybody who has comments or questions. The County Board of Supervisors has been holding hearings every week or two with Dr. Sarah Cody, who's the County Health Officer. So if you have questions or comments around the whole sort of larger structure that we are subject to, I would encourage you to reach out to Councilmember Joe Simidian, is our representative in this area, or the County Board in general, because it is sort of an unprecedented situation in terms of county health officers for this length of time and this kind of order, sort of directing details like this. So it's in a little bit of flux, I think. Any further board discussion on this item? Seeing none, we will move on to item H4, financial update. Mr. Kenyon will provide a financial update based on the governor's May revised budget proposals.
Thank you, Brian. I guess Marcy's going to get the screen up with the presentation. Thank you, Marcy. Why don't you go to the next slide? Basically, this is going to be broken apart into two main sections. I'll do a financial update, cover a variety of topics, and then a bit about our budget development and adoption process and how that will unfold this year. So going to the next slide, and the one after that, sorry. So I just want to say that start off by saying it's very difficult to understand right now the impact of the health pandemic on our economy and how that might translate into, you know, more locally, the impact on our district finances. The longer the pandemic goes on, obviously the deeper the impact on the economy, but trying to pin down information at this point, it's difficult. So a lot of what you'll hear tonight is still, you know, best guesses, suppositions, and a bunch of assumptions thrown together. We do have to adopt a budget by July 1, however, just like the state has to adopt their budget. So they're in the throes of dealing with that issue. Because things are constantly changing, right? I will talk tonight about adopting the budget in June, but very likely need to revisit the budget in late summer when we have more information and asking you to make some adjustments. So moving on to the next slide. Basically, I will call the budget I present starting next board meeting as a baseline, or maybe even I'll call it a placeholder until we know more information, right? But I want to start saying that we'll have to put out a variety of what if scenarios because there are a lot of unknowns. I will keep saying that, and we need to be prepared for possible worst case scenarios. We're not alone in this, right? This is unprecedented. I think Brian or Jeff said that earlier tonight. It's unprecedented for us in trying to adopt a budget when we have, compared to most years, very little certainty as far as the information and the assumptions on which we can base our budget. So I will continue to keep you apprised, and we will continue to try to update our budget as more information becomes available. Next slide, please. So getting into the financial update itself, go ahead, one more slide, talking about property tax revenues. So basically our property tax revenues and property tax revenues in general are based on two key factors, the assessed value of property and people's ability to pay their taxes. Assessed value of property under Proposition 13 it was set at a certain level back in when Proposition 13 was passed and can only increase with an annual inflation factor every year, which has a cap of 2%. So if you own a property that you've owned since early 1970s, your assessed value has only gone up 2% a year as a maximum. But if the housing, if you sell your house, your assessed value will go up based upon the sale price of the home. I think you all know that. So we've been benefiting for a number of years by housing turnover because there are a number of homes in our community that have been in pre-Proposition 13 values. And as they turn over, sell, the assessed value has jumped markedly to market value. And that continues as a greater percentage of our properties are well under the average sale price of homes. In bad economic times, like during the Great Recession, property values can actually decline. The county has the right and the actual direction under Proposition 8, which was a follow-up to Proposition 13, to reassess property assessed values downward if market prices have plummeted. And they did that during the Great Recession. Assessed value can also decline if there's a negative inflation factor, which there could be this coming year. During the Great Recession, about a decade ago, our AV did decline 1 year because both of those conditions existed at the same time, a negative inflation factor and a Proposition 8 reassessment downward. I know my assessed value went down during that year. I think if you had your home during that time, yours would have gone down as well. Moving on, next slide. On the ability to pay side, I talked a little bit about assessed value. I'm talking here about the folks' ability to pay during the current economic climate when we have a number of businesses, particularly small businesses, closing and more people being unemployed. That leads to the potential of people being unable to pay their tax bills, and which may leave the county with not enough resources to fully fund our district and other districts and agencies based on the teeter plan, which requires them to fully fund their obligations no matter what, no matter how much the delinquencies are. I will say that we are probably a little better off than many places in Silicon Valley, because while the unemployment rate is high nationally, it's not as high here. And our taxpayers, the highest taxpayers, the most money that comes from taxes are from large technology firms. And those have been less hit by the unemployment situation or businesses closing than the smaller business and small mom and pops, which probably don't bring a tremendous amount of revenue. That's a little bit on the positive side. So next slide. We've met a couple of times in the last couple of weeks with the county assessor. The county assessor remains optimistic about next year because the assessed roll has already been set for next year. It gets adjusted every month from its January date, and it's been growing. Right now, the assessed value across the county is over 5%. Our assessed value growth from prior year is about 6% with 2 months to go. So it will easily be around 6% for next year. County assessor thinks of next year, the 2021, our budget year, as a normal year, but is gravely concerned about the following year, 21, 22. The fact that Proposition 8 and the downward reassessment of properties may be likely to occur, as well as that negative inflation factor. All we have right now, we don't have facts. We have concerns. We have subjective opinions, but no facts, but we're concerned about that. Because of our AV growth of around 6% right now, we're thinking that we should be solidly at about 5% growth in property taxes based on that 6% AV growth. There will be some downward assessments and roll corrections during the year, and we've accounted for that. So next slide. So I failed to mention, but at the beginning, I should have said that since I put the slides together just about a week ago, more information, and the landscape is constantly changing, so I'm getting more information. So I've had to make some updates since last Thursday, and I've made them tonight, and probably called them out in a couple of slides here. Back in our second interim, our multi-year forecast, we were projecting the 5% growth in property taxes for next year and 4% growth every year thereafter, not having anything else as a benchmark. In conversations with our county office late last week, it was pretty clear that they are suggesting for basic aid district that we use a 0% tax growth for the 2 years beyond next year, 21, 22 and 22, 23. So our actual budget projections will include those assumptions for those 2 years, and then moving back to a 4% turnaround for the succeeding 2 years. Keeping in mind that our average growth over any of the last 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, you can go back to the Great Recession, any point in time when you take at least 5 years, our property tax growth is averaged over around 6% in any of those groups of years. But back to supposition or what could happen if there are significant reassessments downward, and if there are a negative inflation factor for 21-22. We talked with our county assessor about a possible drop of as much as 10%, which would put us at from 5% growth next year in 2021 to a negative 5% growth, or a decline of 5% in 21-22. So going to the next slide to kind of visually represent that with a chart. And that could hit us with a loss that could be in the $4 to $5 million range. Now, and I can go into more detail on that, but just so you could see what the 10%, one worst case scenario. There are many possible worst case scenarios or different case scenarios. Again, we're sort of struggling a little bit with getting some certainty on some of the information. So moving on to the next slide. So some of the key pieces of data, unemployment in our county grew in 1 month from February to March, not significantly. Just so you know, during the Great Recession, the peak unemployment rate was a little over 11%. So we're well below that currently. In terms of property tax delinquencies, so I had to update the information. Some of the information I shared in an earlier version of these slides was inaccurate. It had some misinformation from the county. There was the worst year, there was a 3.2% delinquency rate, okay? And just so you know, the revenue and taxation codes in our state allow or enable counties to abandon the teeter plan. The teeter plan is where the county has to fully fund what's promised to the districts and agencies. If delinquencies exceed 3%, counties are enabled to abandon the teeter plan. Our county did not abandon the teeter plan during that worst year of the Great Recession when there was a 3.2% delinquency rate. But I continue to be concerned about what might happen in the coming years if there is a delinquency above 3%. Just so you know, for the current year, again, this is an update from an earlier version. As of the end of April, there was over 98% of current year tax revenues already received. Next slide. It's interesting to note what's happened in the past. You can see two points when we had the dot-com bust and then during the Great Recession. In each recession, the one we're heading into right now, each recession is different, obviously, different circumstances have caused it. During the Great Recession, there was a V-shaped recovery where there was a sharp downturn and a very rapid recovery. A little more U-shaped back during the dot-com bust. Not sure how our recovery from the decline during these coming few years will be, but most economists are abandoning the V-shaped recovery discussion, talking about either a U or an L shape. L being where you stay down for a period of years before it begins to tick back up, with an unknown about when it will tick back up. Again, this is background. This isn't giving us any specific information, just that there's uncertainty about what might happen going forward. Next slide. So turning from our property tax, which is our biggest source of revenues, to the state budget and the governor's proposals as part of the May revise and what that might mean for us, sort of honing in on the key factors for us. First of all, governor proposes no cost of living increase, no funded cost of living increase. That would affect our special education funding, which does get a COLA every year. So that's the one impact on us. an LCFF district, which is a district not based on property tax revenues primarily, going to get a severe cut, 10% cut to the base grants. And on average, that's equivalent to a little over $1,000 per ADA, average daily attendance students. Because we are primarily basic aid or community funded district, we're not affected by those proposed cuts. But as during the Great Recession, the state's likely to give us some kind of cut, maybe a haircut instead of a deep lopping off of our heads. I'll talk about that on a little later slide. So that's one impact that's possible, whatever the state may end up deciding about cutting us in somewhat relation to what they're proposing to cut LCFF districts. Another thing that affects all of us is a cash flow issue. The state, as an accounting measure, will defer all of their cash allocations out to school districts in June. They will defer them and move them from June to July. So from an accounting standpoint, they don't count those expenditures in their 1920 financial statements, which helps them stay whole through 1920. And then they immediately disperse the monies in 2021 in July. We could possibly be impacted in our general fund by a small amount, and we could borrow from our special reserve fund for 1 month to deal with that. Next slide. One thing the governor continues to propose is his proposed increase to the funding rate for special education by about $100 per student. We've talked about that since January when he first made that proposal. It could mean up to $400,000 for us. We're not currently budgeting for that. I believe that it's what I might call low-hanging fruit for the legislature to go after as they negotiate a budget for next year based on the very difficult revenue projections that they have facing them. Another positive thing from the governor's proposals, which he should be fairly easily able to implement because there is money set aside in the state coffers for the 2 state retirement systems, and he's proposing transferring some of that money to relieve our burden as an employer by reducing our payroll tax by a little around 2% for the STRS, State Teachers Retirement System, and 2% in 1 year, and then another 2% in the year 2 for the Public Employees Retirement System. So a 2-year rollback, if you will, for each of those. Could save us as much as $1.5 million. And those savings, the reduction in costs, are part of our budget that I will bring forward on June 1, as I said, because that seems like a much more likely funding source because the money is already set aside for helping out in that direction. So next slide. So back to the idea of what could the state do to basic aid districts since they're doing a major cut to LCFF districts. So a little bit of history. Prior to the Great Recession, we were in a different funding scheme called the revenue limit, and there was a base or unrestricted funding and a whole bunch of categorical programs with attached funding. So our categorical funding besides special ed was at $3.3 million right before the Great Recession, or I think it was 12, 13 when they did right before they implemented the LCFF. The non-basic aid districts were cut by around $700 per student. So the state said, we're going to cut all districts by around $700 per student. So what we call a fair share cut, basic aid districts was equivalent to what the non-basic aid districts received or suffered, was about $2.65 million. That left us with a balance of $650,000. When the new funding scheme came on board around this time, all that money got rolled into one bucket. It's no longer categorical and it's unrestricted. We've been receiving it every year since the first year. I think it's 2013, 14. So you need to know about that. We have $650,000 that we have coming in every year. Click on next slide. I think there's something else at the bottom. So highlighting in blue. So there's one area that the state could possibly recoup some money. That's the $650,000. Another area, the voters passed during the Great Recession, Proposition 30, the Education Protection Act, which guarantees $200 per student, I think for a number of years, almost to 2030. I forget the exact year it finalizes. That's roughly $800,000 to us. Let's go to the next slide. I've identified two sources. So in combination, that's a little under $1.5 million. But I want to point out the state has a constitutional obligation to provide as a minimum $120 per ADA per average daily attendance. That is called basic aid. That's what the original term was. That's where basic aid districts get their name, because they have always been, it's been constitutionally required that all districts get at least that amount of basic aid of $120 per student, no matter what their status. That's where it comes from. When you multiply about 4,000 kids times 120, you get a little under $500,000. So when I look at the 1.45 million in the two funding sources that are unrestricted from the state, and believe that it's more likely that the state has to continue to maintain that obligation of around $480,000, I'm thinking the worst possible case, at least right now, that I can come up with is a cut of around $1 million. Okay, going to the next slide. So that's a little bit on the state and the May revised. Just a rehash real quickly from the town hall meeting from last week. Next slide. I just shared the following elements. I've discussed them on the previous slides. Go ahead and click next. I should mention this, our parcel and property tax revenues for the upcoming year seems fairly safe. My concern is not so much about 2021, it's more about 21, 22. It echoes what the county assessor has said, that we have to be prepared for that year, possible drawdowns, declines in our assessed value, and thus property tax collections. But again, optimistic and sanguine about the upcoming year. I think the property tax growth at 5% for upcoming year is a pretty solid number. Next. I guess I just said, but this says what I was just saying. Next. Oh, again, I shared this at the town hall meeting that it could be a $4 to $5 million possible loss of revenue. State funding, again, could be down as much as $1 million. These are some of the worst case scenarios I'm putting forward for now. Next. I also indicated at the town hall meeting, we've got a drop in rental income and a drop in facility use fees because of the closure of facilities. Currently, I'm not sure how long that will last. And certainly the ability of PTAs and the foundation to fundraise during these economic times is going to be very challenging. So that's some information shared last week. Going on to the next slide, please. Now we're moving into, after the sort of financial updates and some of the key indicators, a little bit about our budget process. I don't want to make this too lengthy. Again, looking to present what I'll call a workload budget, stealing from the governor or the state terminology, workload meaning no new programs, and using as current assumptions what the governor has proposed, accepting, of course, his proposal for that additional money for special education. I note that in past years, there was much more certainty. I'm going through all these caveats again. Much more certainty, not the case this year. Two key indicators, personal income tax and property tax revenues for the current year won't be finalized until August. The state will know much more. Our county assessor and tax collector will know more in August and September when those numbers are finalized for the current year, and they will have some better projections for going forward into 21, 22. So going forward, next slide. Again, difficult to pin down assumptions with the landscape ever changing. We want to continue to present to you different scenarios, depending on including some worst case scenarios. Still no certainty regarding what might be the worst case. And we should be planning for the worst, but not decimating our program. I think Jeff alluded to that earlier. Going to the next slide. I've quoted here from an article from our financial consultants in Sacramento School Services, California, when they say, giving out some information to all of us. They identify some of the overarching goals. You can see what they are: minimizing impact, maximizing progress, informing stakeholders, broad-based support. Keeping in mind the ultimate objective is to keep us financially healthy, but prepared to continue to effectively serve our students, both today and tomorrow. Very timely words. Moving to corrective action, because I think there's a bit of a call for action as we face the upcoming potential financial impact of this pandemic. The earlier we take action, we did that during the Great Recession. It helped us. It worked then. It has a compounding impact. If you save $1 in year one, that becomes $2 by year two, $3 by year three, and so on. So the earlier we take action in terms of saving money or enhancing revenues, the better off we are. We've begun identifying some possible cuts, some of which we could implement over the next few months. We will bring information forward as we get further along here. And the next slide. So I've identified, what could we do now? What could we do a little bit later, kind of broken it apart. What are some of the possible savings that we could make from our 1920 when we close our books? There's a hiring freeze. We could eliminate spending on non-essential goods and services, et cetera, reviewing all funding sources to see if we have flexibility. Those are some things we could look at doing right now. Next slide. If we look more towards when we have more concrete information, August, September, if we identify some possible cuts, we could begin to implement those changes either between now and then or in the early fall timeframe, depending on what we're talking about. We have more solid information as well. We can certainly enter into collective bargaining with our employee groups to see if there's any possible savings in that area with compensation, and also begin to look ahead more long-term. Going to the next slide. So as we look towards the 21-22 school year, wherein I think we have our biggest challenge, some of the things we will have time to look at some of these things: increasing class size, using combo classes or other strategies to reduce the required number of teaching positions, possibility of consolidating schools, implementing other longer term changes that I've identified here. I don't know if it's on the next slide. Let's go ahead and see. If not, I will comment on it. Let's go back a slide, Marcy, please. So just know that we will know a lot more about the property tax information in December. We will have the inflation factor that will affect the assessed value roll for the 21-22. The inflation factor will be known by December, and the county will set the roll by January 1. So we'll have a lot better handle on what we might be facing in 21-22, well before the March 15th deadline for layoff notices for certificated staff if we need to use that lever, just as a piece of information. So now next slide. What other possible levers do we have during a financial situation where we're challenged? We could look at our Measure M bond fund, and just reminding you that two options. You had directed us to use rental income from the tenants on the site, the 10th site we purchased earlier this fiscal year. You directed us to use the rental income to help defray some of our general fund costs that were used to pay the debt service on 2 capital leases, and money that was being used for future facilities upkeep, deferred maintenance projects. We could move those expenses out of the rental income category and charge them directly to the bond, because those are allowable expenses under Measure N, and use the rental income, which could go directly towards supporting our general fund. That's one allowable uses of rental income. Another possible option to consider is enabling the tenants to stay one longer year. I haven't really vetted this very far, but just want to put that out there as a possibility for us to think about. Instead of, currently the tenants are allowed to stay until December 2022. If we could allow them one more year, that would increase rental income, which is another possible revenue source. We would need to get buy-in from the city of Mountain View because we have a required date for the recreational amenities to be on site. And obviously we couldn't do that if the tenants were staying on. So next slide. Sort of concluding here with next steps. Like to get some feedback from you tonight and going forward regarding some of the key assumptions. I've updated one set of assumptions. I think I alluded to this earlier. Our property tax growth assumptions over the next few years: 5% next year, 0% for 21-22, 0% for 22-23, and then moving back upward a bit at the 4% level going forward. I don't know if you have any thoughts regarding that. All of the state funding assumptions based off the governor, the fair share hit issue. I will say that and I guess I didn't mention this, right now we're building our budget on what the Department of Finance has indicated the impact will be to basic aid districts. And that is a 10% haircut. Again, I'm using that word, for those funds that not Prop 30 EPA money, that $800,000. But mostly that's $650,000. There's another $50,000 small pot of money we get. So in combination, about $700,000, we're proposed to get a 10% haircut, or about a $70,000 hit. And that's what we're going to build our budget on. But is that not conservative enough as what I'm calling a fair share hit? Certainly we cannot absorb a $1,000 per kid hit like LCFF districts might be experiencing. And that's going to depend on the type of districts. The more higher the unduplicated pupil count, the higher that hit will be. The lower than $1,000 per ADA that hit will be. That would mean about $4 million, and we don't get even that amount of money from the state, so they couldn't take that away. No COLA for any programs. That seems like a pretty reasonable assumption. The governor's proposal to increase per student funding for special ed, I'm arguing that's a specious assumption to use right now. You might feel differently. His proposal to reduce the employer rates for 2 years, I think is pretty solid. Want to hear your feedback on that. More importantly, property tax delinquencies, downward assessments, what you might think about the possible impact on property tax revenues. The big thing is, how long do we think the pandemic's going to go on? How does that hit the economy? How does that affect things like rental income, facility use fees? Because I've made some assumptions on that. And anything else that you want to comment on. And you will get a little more specificity on next week. So moving ahead, Marcy, one more slide. So next week, we'll present the 2021 budget as part of a public hearing. Remind you that this year, because of the pandemic, the state has rolled back or postponed the Local Control and Accountability Plan, the LCAP, review and approval for about 6 months, I believe, to December. And instead, as part of the adoption of the budget, we'll have to present a COVID-19 operations report. Sandra will be doing that. And the slide here shows you basically what that is going to be about. This is using language from the state. And then 1 week later, we will ask you to adopt the budget, again, based on current assumptions and suggesting that during the summer, as we get more information, we will update assumptions and likely bring you an adjusted budget to review and potentially adopt those adjustments in the August-September timeframe. Next slide, and that might be the last. That's the last. So sorry, a little long-winded, but I had a lot of information. Again, the information is ever-changing, so a lot of uncertainty. Well, I'll turn it back over to you, Brian.
All right, thanks, Randy. Do we have any preliminary questions before we take public comment from anybody? Vladimir?
Yeah, Randy, do you have an estimate for how much of our property tax revenue comes from businesses as opposed to residences?
I think you can still hear me, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So by and large, our property tax, our properties are close to 90% residential. So the far and away, the bulk of it's from residential.
All right.
I don't know the exact percentage, but that's the.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. That's the only question I had.
Okay. Anybody else?
Hopefully, people are aware.
Go ahead. Yeah. We will now take public comment. To comment on this agenda item, members of the public should use the raise hand button if using the Zoom app, or press *9 if using your phone. Your name will be announced. When it is your turn to speak, please make sure your microphone is on. Do we have any members of the public who wish to comment? Not seeing any, so we will move to discussion. So do we have, I guess, do we have maybe first any sort of general discussion, and then we can get to the questions that Randy had in his presentation. So general thoughts for anyone? Jessica?
No real general thought. I guess my general thoughts is thank you for this exhaustive, maybe exhausting also, presentation. It was great. Thank you. I guess I'm just saying, I've been to a couple of these presentations put on by the county and PACE, and it seems to be, your assumption seems to be on par with what I've seen in these other presentations. Anyway, I just wanted to say that. There's nothing else to add. When we get to, other pieces of what you're asking, I'll speak up again.
Okay. Any other board members? I don't see any. So yeah, I think in general, I think a lot of these things look reasonable. I think one of the takeaways from your slide about the Great Recession is that, as you, I think, have said before, things tend to hit property tax revenues 12 to 18 to 24 months after the rest of the economy. So I think that's something for us all to keep in mind. I also think that the impact on the economy and the unemployment rate may go up a lot as the federal support, such as it is, expires or runs out, or any of the rest of that. One other thing I just wanted to mention for mostly the rest of the audience that you didn't mention is that the governor has indicated, at least verbally, that some of the cuts he's contemplating might be reversed if federal aid to states is forthcoming. So I would encourage everyone who cares about education to contact your congressional representatives and lobby for aid to states in general and education in states in particular, because most, I would venture to say 99% of the districts in the state are in worse shape than we are right now, and desperately need more help from either the state government or the federal government.
Brian?
Yeah.
So Brian, I didn't add this, something that I learned today. So some of the federal money that's coming to the state, the governor has proposed taking some of that money, funding it out to school districts, all school districts, based on their poor students and their students with disabilities. So specifically for us, if that were the case, this is to help with the learning gap that's occurred as part of the distance learning situation. That could be $1/2 to $750,000 to us in one-time monies to help us address particularly our most needy kids. Again, that's a proposal. It may come to fruition over the next few months. In case you heard about that, I wanted to mention that tonight.
Right. All right. Anything else general? Otherwise, there's a lot of questions here. It seems like it might be simplest just sort of for each of us to walk through that slide.
On assumptions, maybe?
Yeah, the first next step slide, which I think is that's where basically I think you've summarized all of your feedback requests.
Yep.
So why don't we just sort of go through that person by person? Who would like to go first?
I can do it. Just kidding.
Vladimir, go ahead.
I'll go. My feeling, and it's not based on any particular knowledge that I have, my feeling is that we will find that our property tax assumptions, the growth for next year is probably too high. Given what I see about the national economy, I think that looking to a 5% growth next year is I would be surprised if that happened, and I'd be more comfortable if we planned on a 0% growth. And if it did happen, if we did get 5%, I don't think we've ever had any difficulty in spending the money. The other thing is that you had mentioned, Randy, that our unemployment rate in Silicon Valley was well less than 10% currently. My understanding is that the national unemployment rate is approaching, I don't know, 25% or something like that. And so there again, I think that
it's a ripple effect.
What's that?
Go on.
We need to factor that in, and I think that assuming that our unemployment rate will stay less than, let's say, 11%, which is what happened in the Great Recession, again, is probably unreasonable. My feeling is it's going to rise more than that. And the last thing is has to do with the shape of the recovery. The best possible recovery is a V-shaped recovery. Next best is a U-shape, and far and away the worst is the L-shaped recovery. And I just wanted to point out that Japan, for instance, lost 10 years in an L-shaped recovery, essentially. They just were not able to grow at all, and they just sort of flatlined for 10 years or more. And that's what the L-shaped recovery is. So perhaps the 0%, followed by, I think you said 4% the following year. Again, that may be optimistic as well. So in sum, my recommendation, not my recommendation, my feeling, my personal feeling, based on, I'm not an economist, I haven't been studying this stuff, blah, blah, blah. My personal feeling is that what you've presented here as possibility is probably on the optimistic side, and that we should take more steps to look at scenarios that are worse than what you've currently done. That's my feeling.
Okay, Charlie, I'll get to you in 1 second, but I think, Vladimir, if you had a specific, I think the one specific thing that I didn't see on that slide that I think it might be helpful to get a sense of is Measure N funding, sort of spending Measure N money on more things than the board had been willing to spend it on before.
Oh, I think that we definitely should do the switch and use bond monies to go for facilities and use the rental income that we get, such as it is, and use that for operating expenses. I think that's a wise move now. It was not a wise move later on. That's why we didn't do earlier, and that's why we didn't do it. But I think now the time has come to switch that over. Does that answer you?
Yeah, great. Thank you. All right, Shally?
Thanks, Brian. So I was thinking back to Jeff's presentation about we don't know what school's going to look like in the fall, and we would have to pivot very quickly. So not knowing what school's going to look like, Randy, are you, and you don't have to answer this right now, but are your assumptions based on a normal school year where we're all in school, or is it kind of take into account the myriad of things, the possibilities that could happen in the fall?
Yeah, good question. I will answer that more directly next week when I present the budget with all the different assumptions. I am not assuming a normal year. I've not assumed a normal year for the remaining of 1920. We've made some budget changes too on the expense side and the revenue side. And we're making some non-normal year changes, revenue and expense for the upcoming year. It's just a question of how long. For example, rental income and facility use fees. I do have some revenues projected from them for next year, assuming that at some point we will go back to a more normal use of those facilities. But it's not for a full year. So you'll get a little more specificity at the next meeting.
Okay, and I had one more question, that's okay.
Yeah.
So I was, we've been discussing our reserves and building up our reserves, and I was wondering, and again, you don't have to answer this right now, but what would be the impact on our reserves?
So you will see that also when I present. I will present sort of I'll call a baseline budget for you, but I'll also have some what if scenarios, some worst case and so forth to look at. So you can see, I don't think you're going to adopt more than one budget. But again, we can definitely adjust the budget as we get more information as we move into the summer and early fall.
Thank you.
Any feedback, Charlie, in terms of the assumptions that were in here or the measure and money side, just for guidance for Randy?
No, nothing specific.
Okay. Steve or Jessica? Steve.
I'll go.
Okay.
Hey, yeah, who knew I could talk, right? So I'm comfortable with 5%, given that the history we have with the county tax assessor, he's actually been fairly accurate historically in terms of revenue growth and expectations. So the need to reduce that for next year, I don't think is there for me. I agree with the 0, and maybe it's a 0, maybe it's like a slightly negative. I think 5% is too big, but maybe a slightly negative. And I do agree with the idea that it will probably be more of an L-shaped recovery. So that concept of 4 might be, again, a little optimistic out there. I would make it a positive growth, but maybe not that much of a positive growth if we're going into more of an L recovery. So that's my take on it as well, from that perspective, for what it's worth. The measure N money, I'm uncomfortable with tapping it, to be honest with you. We've been nickel and diming it away. I think we're going to end up owning land and not be able to do anything with it at the rate we're going. And so I continue to be concerned about that perspective, and that we'd have to go back and ask for more money to build out anything there, given the rate we're kind of starting to work through that cash. So just want to make everybody really think twice about, oh, that's there, let's tap it as a scenario moving forward if we really think I'm just not sure that the community has the stomach for us to go back and ask for money just to do something with land we bought, which is where we could end up, a position we could end up in if we keep spending.
Okay, Jessica?
As for your assumptions, I agree with them. I think that the whole property tax assumptions are squarely based on the assessor findings. Maybe it'll be less, but I don't think it's going to be anywhere near 0% for next year. As it relates to measure ends money, I'm with Vladimir on this. I used to think, no, we don't touch Measure N until we're building something on the 10th site, but we need to make ends meet, and we need to keep the financial viability of our district. So I'm willing to tap into it for these purposes. I'm not saying we go all in on it, but I think for what we can use it for, which is at this point minimal, I think we should. Honestly, you have length of pandemic and length of pandemic. I think we have probably another year of this affecting us, and that's pretty much it.
Okay. For my part, yeah, I think most of your assumptions look reasonable. I'm comfortable, as Steve said, with 5% for next year, given that we're basically there already, and I don't think we're going to see this sort of short-term impact that it would take to reduce that significantly. I think 0 for the next 2 years is one reasonable assumption. I think I would like to see an alternative scenario. Maybe it's not a drop of 5%, but something like that, just as a sort of worst case scenario, particularly because when you sort of talk about decisions that we consider doing later, most of the things that are on that 1 year from now slide in terms of combo classes and school consolidation strike me as sort of worst case scenario alternatives. So I think we should get a look at whether those should be on the horizon or not. A few other details. I mean, extending the lease period from the tenants, I'm not completely allergic to, but that seems like a decision for 2 years from now rather than now, or even 1 year from now, given the commitments we have and everything else. I agree that employment is likely to grow over time, and that it's a little hard to know exactly how that's going to shake out. As far as Measure N, I think it sort of depends sort of what the impact looks like without tapping those funds, right? So I don't know that that's part of the baseline assumption. I mean, I hate to multiply things out to like 4 or 6 scenarios, but I think it is a question, because I sort of see Steve's point that if we end up with too little money left from Measure N to build something on the 10th site, then our community at a minimum is going to have a lot of questions for us. But I also think that our program still hasn't recovered fully from what it was pre-Great Recession, and if we have to make significant cuts, then, or consolidate schools, for example, we know how popular that is in the community. And so I think tapping Measure N money to prevent that from happening is probably something that would have support on balance. So so I do think that one of the phrases that kept being used in some of the seminars we've been in is that everything is said to be on the table in Sacramento. And I think we've got to sort of approach it a little bit from that perspective as well. I mean, in terms of, the current breakdown between PTA fundraising and LAEF fundraising, as I understand it, is kind of a consequence of what happened in the Great Recession. And so, I think this is as if not more significant an event. So we might have to rethink some of those dynamics as a result of this. So we'll just have to see. But I do agree with one of your bottom lines that sort of to the extent that we can tighten the belt for next year without significant changes to the program in terms of, looking at class sizes on the margin, there's always, I think there are always scenarios where we're sort of really close to the class size guidance, and it's a little bit of a judgment call whether you go an extra class or not, or shuffle kids around. I think some of those things may need to be on the table even for the fall, because as you say, if we can save a teacher for the fall, then again, if you look at that graph, the V gets really deep probably 2 years from now. So the more leeway that we can get ourselves now, the better we're going to be.
So Brian, can I clarify something? One of your comments there?
Yeah, and then Steve has a question or comment.
Steve, do you want to go? Or?
Go ahead.
Okay. So when you talk about class size on the margin, you're talking about like 25 versus 26 in a class, if it can save or reduce a teaching position, or 30 to 32 or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, in
Is
my
that
mind,
the kind of thing you're discussing?
I think that would be the kind of thing that would be in mind. Also, I know past practice has been that everybody who registers as a new student by, I can't remember what the date is, in February, is basically guaranteed a spot in their school, in the school that they are in geographically. I think that might be something to consider if the numbers turn out that we can shift kids around. I mean, I really want to avoid, moving kids already in a school to another school. Like, that's not what I'm talking about. But if there are scenarios where we could shift kids who would ordinarily be guaranteed a spot and we would make it work, who haven't started in that school yet, especially, well, and then there's the whole, of course, some kids are going to be remote, and we're going to have to factor that in. And I know you're going to spend a lot of time doing that, but I think it's, as I said, I think it's kind of an everything is on the table in, ascending order of impact to our educational program kind of thing.
Okay.
Steve, go ahead.
I think your last comment made me feel a little better. Part of my concern is that we're trying to define a program and make cuts at the same time. I'd like to see the program kind of defined a little better before we agree on, oh, let's make cuts. So I think there's going to be some staff that or some requirements that are put in place that we need that flexibility to deliver, at least in the first 6 months of the year, possibly, where we are still finding out how many people are not comfortable coming to a school site. And so they'll need to be supported in a different model than the folks that are willing to come to a school site and be taught, at least for partially online or partially live. And so that idea of, well, let's make some cuts and then make the program work seems backwards to me. And I'd rather see us, let's define what we think makes sense best we can, and then make cuts around that. I feel more comfortable with that approach personally. And that means a little patience on our side while that gets worked out and agreed to by the community, the community, and then we can go back and figure out what does that look like. I understand Randy's idea about compound cuts, make cuts now to get you greater benefit. I'd rather be seen us making those cuts in September if we, once we define what we're doing, July, what we understand what delivery looks like, then saying, well, let's make them next week when we get together and see a budget. So it would be my encouragement for us to think about as we move forward.
Vladimir, there's something?
Yeah, just a quick comment about class size. I recently heard about a district where the average class size was 38, and that is just absolutely horrible. But if we have to raise class sizes a little bit, of course, I would want massive teacher input on how to manage that and how to allow teachers to be able to deal effectively with kids in a larger class size. So, for instance, you may not have as much homework. You may not have as much homework that gets corrected, that sort of thing. But our class sizes, at least compared to this other district, are really on the low side. I would like, they're higher than the national average. The national average is around 16 or so. So we in California are not doing very well at all in terms of class size.
Sorry, Jessica?
Hey, as it relates to the class size discussion right now, I agree wholeheartedly with Steve. And one of the things, we don't know what the program is going to be looking like for the fall. And also, most health guidance is that we won't want to have as much kids in a classroom. So I really think the discussion for this year really shouldn't be about changing class sizes. Maybe, yes, in the future when we're out of pandemic times, but I think the health orders are going to speak to something differently once we're physically in the classroom.
Okay, it's going to be interesting. And I mean, I agree with Steve's comment that this is all kind of backwards in a way, just because of the statutory deadlines and because of where we are in the year. So that sort of is what it is. Jeff or Randy, is there anything else, or Sandra for that matter, is there anything else you need from this item?
No, I don't right now.
Okay.
Thank you
Then
for
we
the
will.
discussion.
Yeah.
Oh,
I'm sure it will be an evolution over the
yeah,
next
needs to be.
month or so, or two. All right. We will then move on to item H5, Budget Review Committee recommendations. Staff will share the Budget Review Committee recommendations and preparations for the board deliberation and adoption of the district's 2020-21 budget. Randy.
Sure. I guess I'll start as Marcy's getting the slides up, or the slide up. I think there's a slide. Maybe it's just the actual Word document. There we go. To state the obvious, it's been a very unusual year this spring in trying to look at the budget, as I've already discussed. And it's been difficult to, without being able to pin down some solid information, and to work with a committee where we're not able to work together as we have in the past. We've kind of put together a recommendation that's probably a little on the soft side in terms of immediate action, but it represents our thinking at this point, and we can certainly move forward as we get more information into the coming months and into the coming year, and have the committee maybe revisit their thoughts. But you have what we came up with this year. Again, it's looking at some specific actions that some of which I've alluded to in my slides, if not all of them. And I can't see the bottom of the slide here, or the worksheet. Also including some longer term suggestions for us to consider. So it's just here for your benefit. If it provides any help as you go forward in the next two meetings with adopting the budget, want to take any actions based on this, you're certainly welcome to do so. Again, we'll be bringing you the budget. You already have this. You will also be receiving a report from our Citizens Advisory Committee for Finance. I believe it may be the June 8th meeting, not the June 1st. We have our final meeting with them of this year tomorrow night, and we'll be putting together the final report to you from them regarding our finances. So correct me, Marcy, or somebody who has the agenda, if this is an action item or it's a discussion item. You
This
really
is
don't need.
just for discussion.
Okay, it's there for your edification, and you can use it as you choose. And I'll stop talking. Questions.
Yeah, I think we have talked through a lot of the issues related to this in the course of the last agenda item. Is there anybody from the public who wishes to comment on this item? I don't see any, so we'll go straight to board discussion. Are there board comments? No. I'll say, I mean, for my part, this does, you know, as you say, the process was sort of truncated, so this does kind of seem like a document that was designed for probably for the Great Recession, as opposed to the current sort of multi-dimensional disaster. So it's hard to see taking a lot of these actions for the next year, because what we really have to do first is design an entirely new kind of program for the next year, as Steve said during the last item. So there's only one or two things in here that sort of seem potentially actionable for our actual next budget, and then all the rest is kind of pending a fuller picture of what unfolds from there. but I think you're aware of all that already, so I won't
And I
belabor it.
think, Brian, to piggyback on that, I think staff will bring any actionable items to you over the next 2 meetings that we think could be implemented without jeopardizing the flexibility we need for moving forward.
Right. So, okay. I'm seeing general nods, so I think we will move on to the next item. H6, LASD BCS 2-year facilities agreement extension. The board will discuss and consider approval of an extension to the LASD BCS 2-year agreement, which would extend the existing terms through June 30th of 2023. Mr. Mayor.
Sorry about that. The board has discussed this previously. This is up for action. I would recommend approval to the board on this item. It does reflect the most recent discussion on language. After, should the board approve it, it will, to my understanding, go over to Bullis Charter School for consideration and potential approval at their June 8th meeting. So without much more, I will toss it to you for consideration.
Okay. Any preliminary questions from the board? Seeing none, any members of the public who wish to comment on this item? I see at least one, so we will take public comment. To comment on this agenda item, members of the public should use the raise hand button if using the Zoom app, or press star 9 on your phone. Your name will be announced when it is your turn to speak. Please make sure your microphone is on, and we will give each speaker 3 minutes.
Okay, our first speaker is Sangeeth Paruri.
Thanks for taking comment on this. I just wanted to commend both the LASD and BCS board around their public commentary on wanting to renew the 2-year agreement. I think it's very comforting to see. There's been years in the past where there's been a lot of strife between BCS and LASD. There's also been periods of harmony, especially during the 4-year or the 5-year agreement. With this extension, if this was approved, that would amount to a 4-year sort of agreement, which I think it's really great to see. So I just wanted to commend both boards, and I'm really appreciative of some of the public commentary I've seen from BCS board members around wanting to work together mutually. The only other comment I would add is with this extension, I think the extension makes a lot of sense given the issues at hand with coronavirus and COVID. But once we get a better handle on what that means for our education, our local education system, I want to make sure that the board doesn't lose any urgency in trying to find permanent and long-term facilities for BCS. The community really wants to move past this. I think the community is very supportive of making an extension, but I just want to reiterate that as soon as practical, we need to resolve these issues with urgency. It's really unfair for BCS families to not know where their children will be going to school, and we need to resolve those issues as soon as possible, as well as LASD families. If an LASD school is going to get closed or moved, LASD families need to know that, as well as new families moving into the district. They need to know that as soon as possible. So I just wanted to thank you, and I'm in full support of approving an extension here.
All right, thank you. I don't see any further comment, so we'll go to board discussion. Anybody have anything? Or if not, would anyone like to make a motion?
I'd like to make a motion to approve the LASD BCS 2-year facilities agreement extension as presented.
Second.
All right, motion made by Vladimir, seconded by Shali. And any further discussion? Seeing none, we will do a roll call vote. Jessica?
Yes.
Charlie,
Yes.
Steve,
Yes.
Vladimir.
Yes.
I vote yes. Motion passes 5-0. Moving on. H7, Resolution 19/20-26, Order of Election. Mr. Baer.
Yes, this is a resolution calling for an election on November 3rd, 2020 for 2 seats on the Los Altos School District Board of Trustees. Trustee Spizer's seat and Trustee Talio's seat are both up in 2020 in this year. So this resolution calls for election for those 2 seats. It is presented for your approval, and I do recommend approval.
All right.
I'm not going to recommend disapproval, but I was just curious about what happens if the board declines to call an election.
I have not researched that. Would you like me to?
No.
Okay.
Are there any members of the public who wish to comment on this item?
Dun-dun-dun, dun-dun-dun-dun.
Right. Raise your hand on the Zoom app or press *9. Not seeing any. Any further board discussion? Or would someone like to make a motion?
Jessica, do you want to make a motion?
Sure. I move that we pass resolution 19/20-26, order of election specification of the election order and consolidation request.
Steve?
Yeah, I can
Maybe a
second.
second. All right, Steve first. Jessica makes the motion, Steve seconds. Any further discussion? If not, we'll do a roll call vote. Jessica?
Yes.
Charlie?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
Vladimir?
Yes.
I vote yes. Motion passes 5-0. Moving on. Item H8, Resolution 19/20-27, authorizing the issuance of tax and revenue anticipation notes. Randy.
I believe this is mine. Yes, every year we have a cash flow issue in our general fund because we are predominantly based on property tax revenues, which don't start coming into us until in the wintertime when taxes become due. And we have expenses to meet starting in July with payroll and getting even more expensive in the fall when teachers return. In the past, last year, we issued $15 million in tax and revenue anticipation notes. We were barely able to meet our cash flow needs in October, November. So this year we're proposing increasing the amount. We haven't defined the actual amount. It will be somewhere between 15 and 20 million based on updated cash flow projections. So tonight, all you're doing is approving, as you've done every year in the past, a resolution authorizing authorizing us to issue trans in an amount up to, and in this case, $20 million. Be happy to answer any questions. Just need your approval so we can move forward with that borrowing. We're working with our financial advisors. We've gotten really good rates in the past. We're continuing to use the folks that we used on our bond sale as underwriters to get the best possible deal we can and keep our costs down for this issuance this coming year. We will finalize the amount before we do the actual transactions in early July sometime.
All right, any board questions? I just have, Randy, do you have a sense of what the cost is this year?
You know, I'm still trying to get a handle on the dollar amount. Last year, the cost was around $150,000 in terms of issuance costs, but you have to take into account the arbitrage or the amount of interest earnings we gained on that amount, which actually exceeded our cost. The interest rates were pretty low. They're continuing to be pretty low, I would say in the 1 to 1.5% range. So I think we're in a good place right now in terms of the borrowing.
Okay. Any members of the public wish to comment on this agenda item? Not seeing any. Any further board discussion? Or would someone like to make a motion?
I'll move that we approve resolution 1920-27, authorizing issuance of tax and revenue anticipation notes up to $20 million.
I second.
All right, motion made by Vladimir, seconded by Shali. Any further discussion? Okay, we'll do a roll call vote. Jessica,
Yes.
Shali,
Yes.
Steve,
Yes.
Vladimir?
Yes.
I vote yes. Motion passes 5-0.
Thank you.
We'll move on. You're welcome. To board and administration comments. Who would like to? Right. I'm. When I can't look down the table, I don't know who to look at first. Sandra.
Yes, I was just going to share with you that we are kind of mid-celebration, excuse me, our new teachers who are in the induction program, our program where we support new teachers to clear their credential. It's a 2-year program. This is the week, or the kind of the 2 weeks where we typically celebrate the conclusion of their year of learning. And we typically do that all together in a great celebration we call the colloquium. But this year we are doing it in virtual spaces where we're inviting coaches and new teachers and our principals and leadership, and our new teachers are really sharing the cycles of inquiry they went through within their classroom and the learning that they experienced. Kind of sometimes their case study students that they were really focused on, or whatever their cycle of inquiry might have been around. And I will tell you that it is incredibly heartwarming and so impressive, the work that our very new teachers, first and second year teachers, are engaged in district-wide. And so it's been a great way to celebrate with them their growth as professionals. And we, of course, recognize that they are starting their career in a really unusual situation with the global pandemic. So not only have they persevered through their just first or second year of teaching, but they've done it in an incredible situation and to the highest quality. So huge cheers to our new teachers, because they are absolutely phenomenal. So that's what I wanted to share with you today.
Okay, I'll jump in real quick. I already mentioned that we have the CACF meeting tomorrow night, right here in the district office. No, it's right here in my living room. Just a reminder that you'll get the CACF final report. Actually, I'm going to say it's a 2-stage report. I think I mentioned this previously. They're going to develop a report for you for June, and they're going to come back in the late summer, early fall, and probably give you an updated report based on the additional information we get over the summer. So you'll get that and a report, final year-end report from our Citizens Oversight Committee, our bond committee, over the next 2 meetings. That's it.
I'll just let you know that next week we look forward to having our teachers and classified folks who are retiring join the board meeting, just so we can, at least virtually, give some thanks and get some recognition of their careers here in Los Altos School District. So look forward to that coming. Also next week, I'll share with you how that first day of returning to campuses for our staff, both teachers and classified staff, in order to kind of wrap up for the summer, how that went. A number of people, Aaron Green really spearheading the effort, have taken the county requirements and ensured that each of our 9 campuses are in compliance as we get ready to get teachers and staff back on campus to pack things up, distribute them, take back in those things out there that are district property, and do it in a safe way that's in compliance with the law. So hope to have at least an initial glimpse into that, share with you at our June 1st meeting. That's it.
Thank you, Jeff. Any trustees have updates? Vladimir?
Went to Santa Clara County School Boards Association meeting, and there was a comment made earlier by somebody, maybe Jessica, that a lot of other districts are in worse shape than we are, and they have problems that are more severe than our problems, and that is really true. The other one was I went to a budget workshop. Actually, I think of a budget workshop. I went to a Zoom meeting of a budget workshop that was very long and as usual, detailed, and heard about all the little nitty gritty about how the governor is managing the $16 to $30 billion problem that he has in terms of closing the budget. And I guess the takeaway from there is things will change. So not much to report at this time. That's all.
Anybody else?
I just went to, I had the LAMB PTA meeting and the LASD PTA president meeting, and I also attended a Covington principal coffee. The one constant in all of that is really parents asking about what's happening in the fall. So our town hall was definitely very helpful to that. And so great job. I did attend that too and watched you guys did a great job. And what else did I want to say? And then you did a great job tonight, expounding more about what we're figuring out for the fall. And I look forward to the end of June when we have our first idea of what we're going to do figured out.
So does Sandra.
Right. Yeah, I guess for my part, I've been attending webinars. I suspect the people who are still on this, who are still attending here might be interested. I know a lot of the webinars are maybe open to the public. There's a lot of stuff out there. If you look at the CSBA website, you might be able to attend some of those. If you are still on our meeting after 3 hours and want more, that's a place to look. There's a webinar coming up on Friday morning that CHAC is hosting about student mental health. If you're interested in those issues, go over to their website. I don't know if you can still register for that, but hopefully you can. And in terms of town halls, current thinking, given the cadence of meetings that we have coming up over the next few weeks, the next town hall will probably be at the end of June or maybe early July once we have more answers that have gone in front of the board and that we can then start distributing to parents. We'll figure out whether it makes sense to do one to get information sort of prior to a final decision or not, but probably not going to do one in the next few weeks just because we'll be busy with board meetings. Anything else? Otherwise, we will be, so when am I supposed to show up at the district office to get my gavel? Otherwise, we are adjourned.
Okay. Do you want your gavel?
Just kidding.
We'll have to sanitize it.
Right. All right. Right. I'll come up with an audio equivalent of the gavel.
Thank you, Brian.
Right.
Jeff.
Adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Right. Good night, everyone.
Bye.
Good night.
Bye.